Love, Hate, and Propaganda, The Cold War, a 4-part series with George Stroumboulopoulos. The global fight for your mind.
Imagine you have the most powerful weapon ever invented, and your worst enemy has it too. If either one of you uses it, it could mean the end of the world. Really. What are you going to do? That's the Cold War. The United States and the Soviet Union want to wipe each other out, but each has to be careful not to destroy itself too. So they fight each other with every other means at their disposal, and propaganda is the most powerful of them. It's a ruthless contest in all kinds of fields: sports, culture, outer space, even the kitchen. It's a global war, a struggle for the hearts of every human being on the planet in a time of love, hate, and propaganda.
Spring 1945. After 6 long years of war, time for a little celebration. From the east, the Soviet Red Army, and from the west, American GIs. They come together in the heart of Germany at the Elbe River. The two allies rejoice in their victory over Hitler. Although they're strangers, they party as brothers in arms. But it won't last. They don't know it yet, but soon the love will be replaced with hate.
What pulled the United States and the Soviet Union together during the Second World War was a common desire to defeat fascism. Once they had achieved this objective, the fundamental differences that separated the two superpowers began to appear.
The Allied victory is unequivocal. Hitler has committed suicide. Berlin, the capital of the Third Reich, has been reduced to rubble, its citizens starving and miserable.
Soviet dictator Joseph Stalin won big in World War II, and he intends to milk his victory for all it's worth, even if it means rewriting history.
In this film, Stalin arrives in Berlin. Years of war have taught the Soviet leader that when it comes to propaganda, truth is optional. Even though Stalin never set foot in Berlin, having the people believe he was there at the site of Hitler's defeat is good for his image. Produced at his request and scripted by Stalin himself, the film portrays him as the sole architect of the Allied victory, a message he's happy to hammer home at every opportunity. Stalin oversees every detail of the production. He handpicks actor Mikhail Jolovany to play the lead, even though the actor's way taller than the 5'4" dictator. And if you think that's a stretch, Stalin insists the actor portray him as jovial and affectionate. It is from this image that Stalin builds his personality cult as a war hero and little father of the people.
So thanks to the whole machine of propaganda, Stalin becomes the main architect of the victory. He becomes the liberator of Europe. Not the occupant, but the liberator.
Stalin always looks as if he's got it all under control. But the truth is, he's worried and feels vulnerable. Why? Well, because the Americans have a powerful new weapon of mass destruction, and he doesn't.
The atomic bomb is Harry Truman's ace in the hole. The new American president may seem unassuming. He may lack the swagger and stature of Stalin, but he's proved one thing: he's tough. He dropped a bomb on Japan not once but twice, a decision that finally brought an end to the Second World War. Truman is now commander-in-chief of the most powerful country in the world. And when it comes to defending democracy, nobody does it better.
One way of life is based upon the will of the majority. Second way of life is based upon the will of a minority, forcibly imposed upon the majority.
Well, there's no doubt that Harry Truman lacked charisma. He appeared to be a dull, rather unassuming leader. But it would be his stand, what would eventually become known as the Truman Doctrine, that would actually set the tone for the future of the Cold War.
Truman may look like the small businessman he once was, but don't be fooled. This guy laid it on the line when he stated, "I can deal with Stalin." The world is now divided into two blocks.
The confrontation between the USA and the USSR is an opposition between two empires, two ideologies, two visions of the world. On one side, a free market, democracy, free press, and on the other side, controlled economies, no democratic freedoms, and authoritarian regimes. Between these two, a veritable Iron Curtain will be raised.
The Grand Alliance that conquered the Nazis is broken. The Soviets and the Americans are now bitter enemies, and from now on, the two rivals will compete for dominance all over the globe. One of the earliest confrontations of this new Cold War unfolds in sunny Italy.
This young Californian has no idea he's about to play a lead role in this new war. Mark Wyatt is 27 years old. He fought with the Marines in World War II. He lives in Washington and hopes to become a diplomat, but a friend steers him towards a new career.
He said, "You know, that's wonderful if you want to push cookies or wear striped pants. But if you want to do something tough, you better check into the CIA."
Spring 1948, America's brand new intelligence agency, the CIA, has a brand new secret agent, Mark Wyatt. His first assignment, Italy. His mission? Stop the communists from winning the upcoming national elections. His expertise? Well, he's visited Italy before the war. He likes the country. Plus, his Italian isn't too bad. Like most countries in Western Europe, Italy is in ruins. Everything needs to be rebuilt. After years under Mussolini's fascist regime, the country risks falling into communist hands.
The Italian Communist Party emerged from the Second World War with an enhanced reputation based on their resistance to fascism. It's the Italian Communist Party who provide hope for the Italian people because of the promises they were making about reconstruction.
If the communists actually get elected in Italy, other countries with communist parties like France could be next. So Truman is determined to stop Italy from falling into Stalin's hands.
We had to build a covert action plan to frustrate the Soviet advance. They were winning, I'll tell you. In CIA headquarters at that time, we were scared to death.
But America has a secret weapon of mass seduction. Money, and lots of it. Wyatt starts doling out suitcases full of cash to Christian and Democratic politicians. Basically, anyone running against the communists. It's imperative the entire operation is kept under wraps.
We learned a lot of things. How difficult it was. I mean, the idea of merely using a CIA operative using his tradecraft to transfer large sums of money to a recipient. It wasn't just that. It was the training of the recipient and the volatile situation in the country.
Using CIA money, anti-communist parties print over 40 million posters. Throughout Italy, walls become battlefields. Day and night, messages compete for space. Hope, fear, love, hate, and propaganda blanket the country like gaudy urban wallpaper. The communists have their own source of financing: Moscow, This is all about Soviet and American power. It's war. War by proxy. Even the Pope gets involved. Pius XII threatens potential communist voters with the Catholic Church's ultimate weapon, excommunication.
A communist victory was a real danger for the church. So all the priests, all the Catholic associations were mobilized in a campaign that looked like a religious war. In fact, it looked like a church that was going to war.
The campaign spreads far from Italy's borders. An Italian-American paper in the United States asks readers to send letters to Italy, begging their family and friends not to vote for the communists.
We implore you not to throw our beautiful Italy into the arms of that cruel despot communism.
Have faith in America's proven friendship. Don't repulse the aid that this nation wishes to continue sending. Don't destroy in one day the stupendous work which you have already done in directing Italy towards its reconstruction.
For your own good and for those who want to live in peace, throw off the threat of communism.
The Catholic Church picks up on the initiative and ramps up the propaganda campaign. Catholics send over 1 million letters to Italy.
Posters and letters are great for those who know how to read, but at the time, that's not the case for a large part of the Italian population. The best way to reach them, movies.
The use of traveling cinemas moving from one village to another was very important. It was the best way to reach the Italian population that was the least educated and the illiterate. And with the use of the moving images, it was the best way to spread the propaganda.
Films are carefully selected for their anti-communist propaganda. The Hollywood classic Ninotchka highlights the difference between the American and communist lifestyles.
If I stay here a week, I will cost the Russian people 7 cows.
Greta Garbo is the tough-as-nails Soviet representative in Paris.
Thank you.
She slowly succumbs to the charms of a man who represents everything she hates.
You know the jokes you told me a few days ago? I wake up in the middle of the night and laugh. You know that's wrong. They aren't funny. They're silly. They're stupid.
Not very subtle and not very good, but it works. On the night of April 18th, 1948, against all odds, the Christian Democratic Party pulls an upset over the communists.
Democracy may have triumphed, but the way it triumphed, well, that was questionable.
Well, the time factor was critical. We would like to have done this in a more sophisticated manner. Passing black bags to affect a political election is not really a terribly attractive thing.
The fledgling CIA has passed its first test. Their black ops tactics become their trademark in the war against communism.
Approaching Berlin, we had been in and out of fluffy balls of white clouds. Then suddenly, right over Berlin, we were in the clear. As we looked down, it just about took our breath away. Nothing I had read, heard, or seen prepared me for the desolate, ravaged sight below. The gaunt, broken outlines of once majestic buildings stretched from one end of the city to the other, a mottled mass of total destruction. Where in the world do the 2 million people live?
Summer 1948. Berlin, once the showpiece capital of Hitler's Third Reich, is a city under siege, its population starving. Gail Halverson and his brothers-in-arms from the U.S. Air Force are on a mission: stop Berlin from falling into the hands of Stalin. Berlin is a divided city where capitalists and communists go head-to-head. It's smack dab in the middle of East Germany, which is controlled by the Soviets. For Stalin, the presence of his former allies is unbearable, but he's got a plan to make them pack their bags and get out of town. During the night of June 23rd, the Russians turn out the lights. They also block all road and rail lines into the city.
Overnight, more than 2.5 million people are cut off from the rest of the world, held hostage in West Berlin. But if Stalin thinks Truman is going to give up Berlin, he's in for a surprise.
Harry Truman's response? We stay in Berlin, period. The Americans devise a cunning plan, the Berlin airlift. Every 60 seconds, a plane lands in Berlin, round the clock, rain or shine. It is the biggest aerial relief operation ever undertaken. Air traffic control is choreographed with ballet-like precision. For Berlin to survive, the city needs over 4,500 tons of supplies to be flown in every day. So they dubbed the mission Operation Vittles.
By attempting to blockade Berlin, Stalin is testing the resolve of the Western Allies. And in this sense, Berlin becomes a sort of microcosm of the Cold War in general. However, Stalin is taking a huge risk here, because if the Berlin airlift succeeds, it offers a huge propaganda coup to the West.
Pilot Gail Halvorson flies day and night in and out of Berlin.
The steady fly, 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 interspersed with 6 or 7 hours sleep, left no time off. As those days went by, I began to wonder how long Stalin could take the pounding in the world press he was getting for this inhuman act against a vanquished foe.
Every time the 28-year-old pilot from Salt Lake City, Utah, steps out of his plane, he's touched by the number of kids hanging around the tarmac. One day, he decides to go say hello.
I headed for the fence. Instinctively, I reached in my pocket. All there was 2 sticks of gum. Some jockeyed for a better position to discover what I had. In all my experiences, including Christmases past, I had never witnessed such an expression of surprise, joy, and sheer pleasure that I beheld in the eyes and faces of those young people.
That night in his room, Halvorson comes up with a wild plan. He constructs a few small parachutes to which he carefully ties small bags of candy and chocolates. On his next flight, Halvorson drops his sweet cargo over the outskirts of Berlin. He's an instant hit. To the kids, he becomes the candy bomber.
I was on my way to school. All of a sudden, everyone started screaming and pointing at the sky. The parachutes got bigger and bigger, until one landed right in front of us. All the kids ran to it, and all I cared about was that I got something for myself.
At first, Halvorson is acting on his own with the help of a few pilot buddies. It's their way of bringing a bit of happiness to the kids of Berlin. But when one of the candy parachutes lands at the feet of a German journalist, the story goes around the world.
Gail Halvorson is ordered to come to New York. At first, he thinks he's about to get a reprimand for his candy drops. But he's in for a surprise. As soon as he lands, he's mobbed by the media, including TV networks. The candy bomber is an instant celebrity. Overnight, Gail Halvorson becomes the poster boy for the success of the Berlin airlift. The American propaganda machine kicks into high gear and scores its first points in the new Cold War.
The message from the Americans was clear. Not only can we keep the people of Berlin alive, We can even deliver treats to them. In other words, the Soviet blockade is going to fail.
Stalin's blockade of Berlin lasts 11 months before he finally gives up. Truman had sized up his enemy and called Stalin's bluff. The success of the airlift is another embarrassing defeat for Stalin. Add to that the disastrous Italian elections, and communism isn't doing so well. To give his own image a bit of a shine, Stalin goes on the offensive with a propaganda campaign. He wants his own people to believe that they're living the good life. A tough sell. World War II has left the Soviet Union in a shambles.
Stalin has to rebuild, but he's got other priorities. His biggest fear is an attack from the Americans, so he directs a huge chunk of money to rearming, and more specifically, to building his very own nuclear bomb. It's his people that pay the price.
We were very poor, always hungry and with very few clothes on. When I was in 3rd grade, I received a coupon for a dress, but there were no dresses in the store, so my mother bought a pillowcase with the coupon and made me a summer dress.
10-year-old Angelina Busheva lives in Perm, 1,400 kilometers east of Moscow. She shares an 11-square-meter apartment with her mother, her sister, her brother, and her grandmother, as well as her aunt, uncle, and 2 cousins.
The slogan, "Thank you, Stalin, for our happy childhood," was a contradiction with reality. I wasn't happy at all. How can you speak of happiness when you are poorly dressed and always hungry?
Angelina is not alone. In 1946, Stalin receives more than 500,000 letters of complaint from Soviet citizens. Some are very angry, but amazingly, most continue to worship Stalin. They don't seem to blame him for their misery.
We live poorly. We receive no pay for our work on the farm collectives. Our children are starving. But you know nothing of this. The only ones getting fat and keeping warm are your bureaucrats. They weave stories for you, Comrade Stalin. They are cheating you and lying to you.
Writing to the party, writing to the regime, to Stalin, is something that was practiced years before the war. There's a tradition in Russia, actually, to consider the Tsar as being some kind of a god that can help simple folks to resolve their problems. And the same happens with Stalin. People were writing to Stalin to complain before the war. They're writing to complain to Stalin after the war. And after the war, people have great expectations because they were giving huge sacrifices for the victory, huge sacrifices. So they expect to be rewarded. And when they see the reward are not coming, they want to let Stalin know what is happening.
While the Soviet people cry out for bread, Stalin gives them movies. And they even have to pay to get in.
Dozens of movies are shown in cinemas or outdoors in the country. Ironically, since the Russian movie industry was completely destroyed during the war, they're showing American movies, like Gone with the Wind.
С большим бриллиантом.
Это будет кольцо с самым большим бриллиантом.
To have the sufficient means to rebuild the country and to produce movies who are anti-American, there's a paradox. You have to use movies produced by the enemy. So-called trophy movies that were captured by the Red Army when it occupied Eastern Europe, especially Germany. So you have American movies like Tarzan, the whole Tarzan series, who were shown in Soviet cinemas after the war. And of course, people love those movies. They see them many times. So the money is flowing into the official Soviet budget.
Part of the money goes to rebuilding the Soviet movie industry, which can get down to business making Soviet propaganda films. But a lot of the money goes straight to Soviet nuclear research. August 29th, 1949. On a plane in the Kazakhstan desert, the Soviet Union detonates its first nuclear bomb. Dubbed First Lightning, Stalin now has his very own bomb. The nuclear scales are equal. For now. The world is suddenly a much more dangerous place. The United States is booming like never before. Consumerism is king as the country's prosperity hits new heights.
New houses, new cars, new appliances. Middle-class America now has the means to buy whatever it desires. This is the American dream.
In 1947, real estate developer William J. Levitt has a bright idea. He wants to create a new lifestyle for thousands of American families in a protected environment. He creates Levitttown, the first prefab suburb in America, complete with bungalows and cottages.
The idea is that the suburbs are the backbone of the nation. A man with his own house and his own yard can't be a communist. He's got too much to do.
At the same time as thousands of families are setting up house in the suburbs, television is making its debut. The shows often reflect life in the suburbs, American values, and all the happiness money can buy. TV becomes the ideal method of spreading propaganda on the American way of life.
We missed you at dinner, dear. Sorry you have to work so late.
It seemed like everybody in Springfield had insurance problems today.
Television, probably more than anything else, was responsible for putting forward and solidifying in the American psyche the ideal of the nuclear family, which in reality is actually an exceptional phenomenon.
But television also starts showing more disturbing content, images of the first armed conflict of the Cold War. Korea. On one side, Stalin and his communist comrades want to take control of the country. On the other, the United States wants to stop the spread of the evil communist empire.
America at this time was fighting a war in Korea against communism. And for the first time, the medium of television was bringing this into the homes of ordinary Americans. It's in this climate of fear that Senator Joseph McCarthy steps into the political arena and exploits the propaganda opportunities.
The State Department is infested with communists. I have here in my hand a list of 205 names that were made known to the Secretary of State as being members of the Communist Party.
With that declaration, the 41-year-old Republican senator from Wisconsin is about to ramp up the fear factor and Red Scare paranoia in America.
Americans suspect some of their fellow citizens are communists, and they're scared, really scared. What if there are communists in the government, in the universities, even in schools? It's this fear that triggers an all-out witch hunt.
The communist witch hunt is on, and there will be a lot of casualties. During McCarthy's reign of terror, everyone is fair game, including university professors.
One communist on the faculty of one university is one communist too many.
The powers arrayed against me were exerted by idiots, and the Red Hunt was not challenging my beliefs. It was challenging my freedom. It was challenging the freedom of all of us.
25-year-old Chandler Davis is a mathematics professor at the University of Michigan. Like many American academics and intellectuals, he comes from a family open to communist ideals. He was even a party member for a few years. But that time is long past when he is summoned before the House Committee on Un-American Activities. He's asked if he is or has ever been a member of the Communist Party. He is asked to reveal the names of colleagues who could be communists. Chandler exercises his constitutional right and refuses to answer. He is found guilty of contempt and sentenced to 6 months in prison. He appeals, but the damage is done.
I wasn't going into my office anymore. I didn't see my friends as much, and since people thought that the case was lost and hopeless, I was cut off from my work and my friends. I felt abandoned. I felt all alone.
He's not the only one paying the price. His wife Natalie is studying French history and preparing a trip to France until her passport is taken away.
I was utterly dismayed. I was devastated. I was also pregnant at the time. My immediate reaction was to be stunned. I had imagined this extremely exciting project in France and I couldn't get to it. I was angry. I felt it was unjust.
Chandler Davis is blacklisted and out of work.
It was not Stalin's gulag or a Nazi concentration camp, but when he was blacklisted and couldn't find a job, I said, my God, when is this going to end?
Chandler Davis winds up in jail, not because he was or had once been a communist. No, because he simply refuses to answer questions from a committee of ambitious, self-serving politicians.
By the time Senator McCarthy takes on the U.S. Armed Forces, it's clear he's gone too far. His behavior is crude, insolent, and thanks to television, it's being broadcast into the living rooms of America. People have seen enough. Ironically, the medium that built him up will be the one that tears him down.
Until this moment, Senator, I think I never really gauged your cruelty or your recklessness.
After 10 years, the hysteria brought on by McCarthyism runs out of steam. But it does leave a permanent stain on American democracy.
We were 14 accused, 14 scapegoats charged with all the sins, all the wrongs, victims forced to atone, sacrificed on the altar of socialism.
January 1951, Prague. Arthur London is being followed, and he knows it. While his kids are playing in the yard, London leaves his family home with a strange sense of foreboding.
It is with regret that I leave. That last image of my wife and children will always stay with me.
January 28th, London's worst fears come true.
It's not an arrest. It's a kidnapping in broad daylight in the residential neighborhood. 6 armed men jump out of 2 cars, wrench me from my seat, handcuff me, and throw me into the first car, which takes off.
Stalin has a history of being paranoid, so it should come as no surprise that he too sees spies and traitors everywhere. So at the same time McCarthyism is sweeping America, Stalin starts his own ideological cleansing. But his methods are decidedly more brutal.
These trials are nothing new for Stalin. They're part of his bag of tricks. He employed similar tactics in the 1930s to eliminate his political opponents.
Stalin wants to bring all his sheep back into the flock. He feels that some of the communist bloc countries have strayed from the Moscow party line. He's particularly wary of Czechoslovakia, which used to be a democracy. He suspects certain Czech politicians, like 36-year-old Arthur London, the government's vice minister of external affairs, of having liberal tendencies. London is not alone. He is one of 14 high-ranking Czech officials who are arrested and accused of treason. The strange thing is, he and his wife Lise Ricol have been staunch communists since day one.
I was born into a working-class family, and since childhood I had seen my parents sacrifice everything for us. My father would say we had to fight to change the world. We had absolute trust in the Communist Party.
Arthur London will spend his first 6 months in prison being tortured and starved by his captors. Officials threaten a secret trial, after which they promise he will be hanged. They accuse him of everything, but mainly they accuse him of being the head of an American spy ring in Czechoslovakia. Eventually, under pressure, he cracks and signs a false confession.
Těch, kteří do strany nepatří. Jaké drzosti bylo třeba k tomu, aby o tom hovořil právě Frank.
November 20th, 1952. The Pankratz courthouse. The prosecutor reads the accusations in front of the 14 accused.
It felt as if I was on a stage, each of us ready to play his role in this perfectly staged fiction. One after the other, we all repeated the same thing. I accept my sentence and forsake my right to appeal.
The Prague trials were essentially show trials. They were scripted beforehand, but the confession at the end was all important. Citizens had to be shown to have made errors, to have sinned against the state. And it's this confession that's of the essence. This is where the propaganda value lies.
Most people behind the Iron Curtain don't have television, but the trial is broadcast on radio, and the whole country is listening. The biggest show trial of the Cold War is underway.
Arthur London's wife, Lise, who is listening to the trial, is stunned by what she hears. The setup is so perfect, the propaganda so well orchestrated, that Lise is actually torn between faith in her husband and loyalty to the Communist Party.
It was as if the sky had fallen on me. My first reaction was that if he'd confessed, then it was true, and that made me furious with my husband. At that point, I wrote a letter saying that as a wife, the situation was terrible. He was the man that I loved, the father of my children. But as a communist, I had no choice but to be happy that a band of traitors had been apprehended and that they all deserved their fate, my husband included.
Of the 14 accused, 11 are sentenced to death. Arthur London and 2 others receive life sentences. On December 3rd, 1952, the 11 traitors to the communist cause are hanged at the Pankratz prison in Prague. March 5th, 1953, Moscow. Joseph Stalin, the man who has ruled the Soviet Union with an iron fist for 25 years, is dead.
Stalin may be dead, but Soviet officials still try to keep up the image that he was the loving father of his people. But now that he can't hurt them anymore, some of his citizens begin to see Stalin as the man he really was.
His death is announced on the radio. Even those who suffered under his tyranny, like Angelina Bushueva's family, see it as a tragedy.
They were all crying. My mother, my sister, my grandmother. I wasn't crying. My grandmother said she wished she had died instead of him. But she had suffered so much because of him. Her daughter had been arrested, her grandchildren placed in an orphanage, her son-in-law executed, her husband persecuted because of his religion.
For the communists worldwide, including the Italians, Stalin's death was seen as a tragedy. But viewed by the free world, by the United States, Stalin's death was the beginning of hope. Maybe hope that the tyranny would end.
After Stalin's death, Arthur London's detention conditions improve, even though he's still serving his life sentence. His wife Lise visits him regularly, and each time she brings him tobacco and cigarette paper. In his cell, Arthur London uses the paper to write the story of what happened to him. He hides these miniature pages in the false bottom of his tobacco box. Each time Lise visits him, he gives them to her. Little by little, bit by bit, Lise London learns the truth. But it takes a year before she knows the whole story. She pressures authorities to free and rehabilitate her husband. February 1956, she shows up at the prison.
They took me to an office in the prison, and after a few minutes, the door opens. Arthur sees me, and I cry out, "You are free. You are free."
A few months before Stalin's death, Harry Truman had stepped off the political stage. He could have run again in the presidential election of 1952, but at 68, he chose to retire. The man who stared down Stalin would leave his mark on world history.
I suppose that history will remember my term in office as the years when the Cold War began to overshadow our lives.
Harry Truman stands in history as the only man to have used a nuclear bomb as a weapon. But he also understands that the bomb could spell the end of mankind.
What we see in the early period of the Cold War is that propaganda is dominated by fear of nuclear annihilation. But what it also demonstrated is that propaganda is a sort of substitute for the traditional battlefield warfare that had been associated with previous wars. Propaganda had established itself as an ideological tool, and propaganda will become even more important in the next stage.